The iron skillet hit the rancher's boot with a crack that silenced the entire yard. Martha Vale didn't flinch. The man who'd just tried to cheat her out of her wages stumbled backward, shock written across his hard face. Behind him stood a ranch house with broken windows and 7 pairs of eyes watching from the darkness inside. "You'll pay me what you promised," Martha said, her voice steady as stone. "Or I walk. And you can explain to those children why another woman abandoned them." Stay with me until the end of this story. Hit like and comment your city so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of dust that coated Martha's black mourning dress with one more layer of grime. She'd been wearing black for 8 months now, ever since they'd buried Thomas beside the creek that ran through their Kansas homestead. Black dress, black shawl, black bonnet. All of it practical fabric that didn't show dirt, which was fortunate because Martha Vale had seen more than her share of dirt lately. "Ridgefall Ranch," the driver announced, though the sagging fence posts and peeling paint on the ranch house sign hardly needed introduction. Martha climbed down without waiting for assistance, her worn leather boots hitting the hard-packed earth with a solid thump. She was 32 years old, neither young nor old, neither beautiful nor plain. Her hands were rough from years of kneading bread and wringing laundry. Her face had lines at the corners of her eyes from squinting into cook fires and laughing at her husband's poor jokes, back when there'd been a husband to joke with. The ranch stretched before her like a broken promise. Fences leaned at angles that defied logic. The barn's roof had a hole big enough to drive a wagon through. Chickens wandered freely, pecking at bare ground where a garden should have been. And the house itself, a 2-story structure that might have been grand once, looked like it was held together by stubbornness and little else. A man emerged from the barn, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the kind of careful control that suggested he was holding something back. His shirt was clean, but his face was hard, all sharp angles and shadows. He couldn't have been more than 35, but he carried himself like someone much older. "You the cook?" he asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "Martha Vale, you must be Mr. Shaw." "Garrett." He looked her up and down, his expression unreadable. "Letter said you were widowed." "That's right." "How long?" 8 months. Martha met his gaze without wavering. "Does it matter?" "Might. Women who are fresh grieving sometimes can't handle much. I got 7 children in that house who've already lost one mother. Don't need them getting attached to another woman who'll fall apart when things get hard." The words landed like a slap, but Martha had been slapped by worse than words lately. She kept her voice level. "Mr. Shaw, I buried my husband in April, lost our farm in June, and spent the last 2 months cooking in a railroad camp where the men would as soon fight you as eat your food. If you're worried I'll fall apart, you can set your mind at ease." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect, or maybe just the recognition that she wouldn't be easily dismissed. "We agreed on $12 a month," Martha continued, "plus room and board. That's what your letter said." Garrett's jaw tightened. "That was before I knew you were in mourning. Woman in your state might not last the month. Don't seem fair to pay full wages for half work." The anger came up so fast it surprised her. Not the hot, explosive kind. Martha had learned long ago that kind of anger just got women labeled as hysterical. No, this was the cold, calculating fury that came from being underestimated one too many times. "I see." She turned slowly, surveying the ranch with new eyes. "So you brought me all the way out here, knowing you had no intention of honoring our agreement." "Now, I didn't say that. I just think—" "You think a woman in black is desperate enough to work for less?" Martha faced him again. "You think grief makes a person weak. I think grief makes people unreliable." "Then you're a fool." The word hung in the air between them. Garrett's hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment Martha wondered if she'd pushed too far. But she was tired. Bone-tired of being pushed around, of being treated like something fragile, of men who thought they could change the terms just because she was alone. "What did you say?" "I said you're a fool, Mr. Shaw." Martha kept her voice calm, conversational even. "You know what grief does? It burns everything else away. All the soft parts, all the weakness, gone. What's left is someone who's already survived the worst thing that can happen. You want to know if I can handle your children and your broken-down ranch? I can handle anything, because I've already lost everything that mattered." She reached into her carpet bag and pulled out the iron skillet she'd carried all the way from Kansas. 10 inches of well-seasoned cast iron, heavy as sin and twice as useful. Thomas had given it to her on their wedding day, and it was one of the few things she'd salvaged from the farm. "This skillet," she said, holding it up, "has cooked 1,000 meals. It's cracked a man's skull when he got too friendly during a barn raising. It's killed rattlesnakes and raccoons and once a coyote that got into our chicken coop. It's the most reliable thing I own." "That's real interesting, Mrs. Vale, but—" Martha dropped it. The skillet fell straight down and landed square on Garrett Shaw's left boot with a crack that echoed across the ranch yard. He yelped, actually yelped, and stumbled backward, hopping on one foot while his face went through several interesting shades of red. "What the hell's—" $12 a month, Martha said calmly, picking up her skillet, "plus room and board. That's what we agreed to. You can pay me what you promised, or I'll get back on that stage, and you can explain to those 7 children why another woman left them." Garrett was still hopping, cursing under his breath in a way that suggested the boot had not provided adequate protection. "You crazy woman!" "Not crazy, just done being cheated." Martha tucked the skillet back into her bag. "I came here to work, Mr. Shaw, not to beg. You need a cook and I need a position. We can do business honestly or not at all." He finally stopped hopping and put weight on the injured foot, wincing. "You dropped a goddamn skillet on my foot." "I did. On purpose." "That's right. You could have broken bones." "Could have." Martha adjusted her bonnet. "Didn't, though. I'm a very precise cook, Mr. Shaw. I know exactly how much force to use." For a long moment he just stared at her. Then, impossibly, the corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but something close to it. $12 a month, he finally said. "Plus room and board." "Plus room and board." He shook his head, still looking at her like she was some kind of exotic creature that had wandered onto his ranch. "You're either brave or stupid, Mrs. Vale." "Maybe both." Martha picked up her carpet bag. "Now, are you going to show me the kitchen, or do I need to find it myself?" Garrett limped toward the house, favoring his left foot. "Kitchen's a mess. Whole house is a mess. Haven't had a proper cook since, well, since." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Martha had seen the fresh grave on the hill beyond the barn when the stagecoach was pulling in. The dates on the marker would tell the story. A woman who'd died too young, leaving too much behind. The front porch steps creaked under their weight. The door hung crooked on its hinges. And when Garrett pushed it open, Martha got her first real look at what she'd signed on for. The entry hall was dim, lit only by dusty sunlight filtering through grimy windows. The floorboards were scarred and stained. Muddy boot prints tracked through from the door to the back of the house. The air smelled like unwashed children and old cooking grease and something else, something sour and sad that Martha recognized from her own house in those first weeks after Thomas died. Despair. That's what she was smelling. The particular odor of a household that had given up. "Children!" Garrett's voice boomed through the house. "Come meet Mrs. Vale." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, they emerged from the shadows like cautious animals. The oldest was a boy of about 15, tall and gangly, with his father's dark hair and an expression that suggested he trusted nothing and no one. He leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, watching Martha with narrow eyes. "That's Daniel," Garrett said. "He's 15, thinks he's 20. 16 next month," the boy muttered. 16 next month, Garrett corrected without looking at him. "Then there's Rebecca." A girl of about 13 stepped forward. She had blonde hair pulled back in a braid that was coming undone, and a dress that was clean but patched in several places. Unlike her brother, she met Martha's eyes directly, measuring her. "Rebecca's 13. She's been trying to manage the house since—" Garrett cleared his throat. "Well, she's been doing her best." "Ma'am," Rebecca said quietly. Not quite friendly, not quite hostile. Waiting. The other children came forward one by one. Thomas, age 11, with a gap between his front teeth and dirt under his fingernails. Elizabeth, 9 years old, holding a rag doll that had seen better days. The twins, Sarah and Samuel, who were 7 and identical except for the fact that Sarah's left eye wandered slightly when she was tired. And finally, held in Rebecca's arms, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 3. "That's Nora," Garrett said, and his voice changed when he said the name. Softened. "She's the baby." Nora stuck her thumb in her mouth and stared at Martha with eyes the color of summer sky. She was thin. They were all thin, Martha realized, but Nora especially. The kind of thin that came from not enough food, or not the right kind of food, or both. "Well," Martha said, setting down her bag, "I'm pleased to meet you all." Silence. 7 pairs of eyes watching her, waiting to see what she'd do. Waiting, probably, to see how long before she left like everyone else had left. "Mrs. Vale will be cooking for us," Garrett said, "and helping around the house. I expect you all to treat her with respect and do what she says." "We don't need another cook," Daniel said flatly. "Rebecca does fine." Rebecca flinched. "Danny?" "She does. We've been managing." "You call this managing?" Garrett gestured around the filthy hall. "House is falling apart. You're all half-starved. This isn't managing, boy. This is barely surviving. We're surviving fine without—" "Daniel!" Garrett's voice cracked like a whip. "That's enough." The boy's jaw clenched, but he shut his mouth. The muscles in his neck stood out like ropes, and Martha could see his hands shaking where they gripped his arms. Not from fear, from rage. She knew that rage. Knew it intimately. The fury of being left behind, of having to keep going when everything in you wanted to just stop. The anger at the world for continuing on as if nothing had changed when your entire universe had shattered. "Why don't you show me the kitchen?" Martha said to Rebecca, deliberately turning away from Garrett and Daniel. "I'd like to see what I'm working with." Rebecca blinked, surprised. It's not very clean." "I wasn't expecting clean, honey. Just show me where things are." The girl led her down the hall, past a parlor that looked like a dust storm had settled in it, past a dining room with a table that could seat 12, but was currently buried under what looked like several months' worth of papers and odds and ends. The kitchen was at the back of the house, and when Rebecca pushed open the door, Martha had to suppress a groan. It was worse than she'd expected. The stove was coated in grease and ash. The sink was piled high with dishes that had clearly been sitting there for days, maybe weeks. The floor was sticky underfoot. The windows were so dirty they barely let in light. And the smell— "I know it's bad," Rebecca said quietly. "I try to keep up, but with the little ones, and the washing, and Danny needs help with the outside work, and there's just—" Her voice cracked. "There's just so much." She was 13 years old. 13. And she'd been trying to run a household and raise 6 siblings and keep a ranch going, all while carrying her own grief. Martha set her carpet bag on the only clean spot she could find, a small section of counter near the door. "Rebecca, honey, this isn't your fault. I should have done better. Mama would have. Your mama was a grown woman who'd been keeping house for years. You're a child." Martha turned to face the girl fully. "You've been doing the work of 3 grown women, and from what I can see, you've kept your siblings alive and fed. That's not nothing." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "I tried. I really tried, but—" "I know you did." Martha wanted to hug her, but she sensed that would be too much too soon. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves. "Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to help me figure out where things are in this kitchen. Then you're going to take those little ones outside to play while I make us all something to eat. When's the last time you had a hot meal?" I don't remember." "Right. Well, that's going to change starting today." She heard footsteps behind her and turned to find Garrett in the doorway, still favoring his left foot. He looked at the kitchen like he was seeing it for the first time, his face going pale under his tan. "I didn't realize it was this bad." "You've been focused on keeping the ranch running," Martha said, more gently than she'd spoken to him before. "Can't do everything." Rebecca said she had it under control. Rebecca is a child trying to be her mother. She doesn't have it under control. Nobody could have this under control without help. Martha surveyed the disaster. "But it's fixable. Everything's fixable with enough work." Garrett rubbed his face with both hands. I should have paid more attention." "Maybe. But you're paying attention now." Martha turned to Rebecca. "Honey, where do you keep the flour?" "The barrel in the pantry, but there's not much left. Maybe enough for—" "Show me." The pantry was small and dark and mostly empty. 1 barrel of flour, less than a quarter full. Some dried beans. A tin of lard that smelled slightly rancid. Salt. That was about it. "This is everything?" Martha asked. Rebecca nodded miserably. "We've been making do. Danny shot a deer last week, and we've got some of that left in the cold cellar. And there's eggs from the chickens when we can find where they're laying. I've been making a lot of bean soup. I bet you have. Martha did some quick calculations in her head. Mr. Shaw, I'm going to need supplies from town, today. Town's a 2-hour ride. Then you better get started. He bristled. I'm not taking orders from... Martha held up her hand. Mr. Shaw, Garrett, look at your children. She waited until he turned to look at the kids clustered in the kitchen doorway. Really look at them. They're half starved. This kitchen is a health hazard. And unless you want me to make bean soup for dinner again, you need to get me flour, sugar, coffee, bacon, cornmeal, potatoes, onions, and whatever fresh vegetables that store in town has available. I need lard that doesn't smell like death. I need soap, real soap, not just lye. I need clean rags and a scrub brush that isn't falling apart. It's going to cost money. Yes, that's how supplies work. Martha pulled out the list she'd been making in her head. I can make do with very little. I've been doing it for months. But if you want me to actually feed your family properly, I need real food to work with. Garrett looked at the list, then at his children, then back at Martha. She could see him working through it, weighing the cost against the need. Finally, he folded the list and shoved it in his pocket. I'll go. Thank you. But when I get back, we're going to talk about you dropping skillets on people. Fair enough. He limped out, barking orders at Daniel to saddle his horse. Martha heard the boy arguing, heard Garrett's sharp response, heard the front door slam hard enough to rattle the windows. Then it was just her and the children and the wreck of a kitchen. All right, Martha said, clapping her hands together. Rebecca, I need you to take the little ones outside. Find them something to do that doesn't involve being underfoot. Thomas, you stay. I need someone with strong arms. Elizabeth, you can help too. What are we doing? Thomas asked warily. We're going to make biscuits. Martha started pulling out what she could find. And while we do that, we're going to talk about the rules. Rules? Elizabeth clutched her doll tighter. That's right. Every house needs rules, and since I'm going to be cooking here, I get to set the kitchen rules. Martha found a mixing bowl that was relatively clean and started scooping flour. Rule number 1, nobody goes hungry in my kitchen. If you're hungry, you tell me, and I'll find you something to eat. I don't care if it's midnight or the middle of Sunday dinner. You tell me, and I'll feed you. The children exchanged glances, testing to see if she meant it. Rule number 2, if you want to help in the kitchen, you're welcome. But if you're in my kitchen, you follow my instructions. I don't care if you think there's a better way to peel potatoes or mix dough. In here, we do it my way. Yes, ma'am, Thomas said quietly. Rule number 3, we don't waste food. We eat what we cook and we save what we don't eat. Your father is working hard to keep this ranch running. We don't throw away his money by being careless. Martha worked as she talked, her hands moving through the familiar motions of making biscuit dough. No butter, so she'd use lard. Not enough milk, so she'd use water. The flour was coarse, but she'd work with it. What if we don't like what you cook? Elizabeth asked, then immediately looked like she regretted speaking. Then you eat it anyway. Martha smiled at her. But I'm a pretty good cook, honey. Most people like what I make. And if there's something you really hate, I mean really, truly can't stand, you tell me politely, and I'll keep it in mind. But you still have to eat something. She cut the lard into the flour with her fingers, feeling the mixture change texture. Thomas and Elizabeth watched, fascinated despite themselves. You said 3 rules, Thomas pointed out. Is that all? That's all the rules you need to know right now. Martha added water slowly, bringing the dough together. The rest is just common sense. Clean up your messes. Don't sass me unless you're prepared for me to sass back. Treat me fair, and I'll treat you fair. What about... Elizabeth hesitated. What about if we don't want you here? The question was asked in a small voice, but it hit like a hammer. Martha stopped kneading the dough and looked at the little girl, 9 years old, clutching a rag doll, trying so hard to be brave. That's honest, Martha said. I appreciate honest. The truth is, Elizabeth, I can't make you want me here. All I can do is show up every day and do my job. Cook your meals, clean this kitchen, help however I can. What you feel about it is your business. Danny says you'll leave. Elizabeth's voice was barely a whisper now. He says everyone leaves. Danny's been hurt, Martha said carefully. When people hurt that bad, sometimes they say things that sound true but aren't. Has everyone left you? Is Rebecca still here? Yes, ma'am. Is your father still here? Yes, ma'am. Then not everyone leaves. Martha went back to kneading. Some people stay. Some people fight. I'm one of the fighting kind, Elizabeth. I don't run just because things get hard. She shaped the dough into rounds and placed them on the baking sheet she'd found hanging on the wall. The stove would need to be cleaned before she could use it properly, but she'd make do for now. A cook learned to make do. Thomas helped her get the stove going while Elizabeth set the table, or tried to. There were no clean plates, so Martha had them wash enough for everyone while the biscuits baked. The work was familiar, comforting even. This she knew how to do. This she could control. By the time Garrett returned from town, supplies loaded in the wagon, looking tired and sore, the kitchen table was set and the smell of fresh biscuits filled the house. It wasn't much, but it was hot and it was food, and when Martha called everyone to eat, the children came running. They devoured those biscuits like they'd been starving, which they probably had been. Martha watched them eat and made notes in her head. Thomas needed fattening up. Elizabeth was anemic, probably. The twins were too quiet. Nora wouldn't eat unless Rebecca fed her. And Daniel sat at the far end of the table and ate mechanically, his eyes never leaving his plate, his jaw working like he was chewing nails instead of biscuits. These are good, Rebecca said softly. Really good, Mrs. Vale. Thank you, honey. Mama used to make biscuits on Sundays, Sarah, or was it Samuel, said. But they weren't as fluffy as these. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Rebecca went pale. Daniel's fork clattered against his plate. Garrett's hand tightened around his coffee cup hard enough that Martha worried the ceramic might crack. Well, Martha said evenly, every cook has their own way. I'm sure your mama's biscuits were wonderful in their own right. They were, Daniel said, his voice flat and cold. Everything she did was better than anything you'll ever do. Daniel, Garrett's voice was sharp. Apologize. No. Boy, I said, let it be, Martha interrupted. She met Daniel's hostile gaze across the table. He's allowed to feel however he feels. And he's right. I never knew your mother. Maybe her biscuits were better. Maybe everything she did was better. That's not for me to say. Then what are you doing here? Daniel demanded. If you're not trying to replace her, what's the point? The point is your family needs a cook, and I need a position. That's all. Martha took a sip of her coffee, weak but hot. I'm not here to be your mother, Daniel. You already had a mother, and from everything I can see, she was someone worth remembering. I'm here to make meals and keep the kitchen running. Nothing more, nothing less. We don't need you. Yes, you do. Martha kept her voice gentle. You needed me the minute I walked through that door and saw your sister trying to do the work of 3 grown women. You needed me when your father rode to town to hire a cook because he couldn't keep this household running alone. Needing help isn't shameful, son. It's just being human. Daniel shoved back from the table and stalked out. They heard the front door slam, heard his boots on the porch steps, heard him disappear into the evening. I'm sorry, Garrett said quietly. It's been hard on him. No apology needed. Martha stood and started clearing plates. He's grieving. Grief comes out however it comes out. She washed dishes while the other children scattered to their evening chores. Rebecca tried to help, but Martha shooed her away. You've done enough for today. Go rest. But that's not a request, Rebecca. That's an order. Martha softened it with a smile. You've been carrying this household on your back for too long. Let someone else carry it for a while. When the last dish was dried and put away, when the kitchen was as clean as she could make it in one evening, Martha stood in the doorway and looked out at the ranch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Somewhere out there, Daniel was working through his anger. Inside, the younger children were settling down for bed. And in the kitchen behind her, the stove ticked as it cooled, and the smell of biscuits still lingered in the air. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Martha thought of Thomas, buried under Kansas soil. Thought of the farm they'd built together, lost to debt and drought. Thought of all the plans they'd made that would never come to pass. Then she thought of 7 children who needed feeding, a broken ranch that needed tending, and a kitchen that needed a cook. Well, Thomas, she whispered to the empty air, I guess this is where the story goes now. The night was coming on. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new conflicts, new opportunities to fail or succeed. But tonight, she'd fed a family. She'd stood her ground. She'd dropped a skillet on a man's boot and demanded respect. And somehow, impossibly, she'd gotten it. It was enough. For now, it was enough. Martha woke before dawn, the way she'd always woken on a farm. The room they'd given her was small, barely more than a closet off the kitchen, but it had a bed and a window and a door that closed. That was more than she'd had in the railroad camp, where she'd slept in a tent with 3 other women and woken every morning to the sound of men shouting and hammers on steel. She dressed in the dark, braided her hair, and stepped into the kitchen while the house still slept. The mess looked worse in the gray morning light. Grease stains she'd missed in the evening shadows, cobwebs in the corners, a water stain on the ceiling that suggested the roof leaked somewhere above. Martha rolled up her sleeves and got to work. By the time the sun cleared the horizon, she had the stove cleaned and a fire going. By the time she heard the first footsteps upstairs, she had coffee brewing and bacon sizzling in her skillet. By the time Rebecca appeared in the doorway, hair mussed from sleep and looking uncertain, Martha had scrambled eggs waiting and bread toasting on the stovetop. "You're up early," Rebecca said. "Farm habit. Never could sleep past sunrise." Martha cracked another egg into the pan. "How do the little ones like their eggs?" They eat whatever we have." "That's not what I asked." Rebecca hesitated, like she was trying to remember something from a long time ago. "Samuel likes his scrambled dry. Sarah likes hers runny. Thomas will eat anything, but he picks out the pepper if you put too much. Elizabeth likes hers fried, but only if the yolk doesn't break. Nora just eats whatever I feed her." "And you?" "Me?" "Yes, you. How do you like your eggs?" Rebecca looked at her like it was a trick question. I never really thought about it." "Well, think about it now." "I guess, scrambled is easiest." "Easiest isn't what I asked." Martha fixed her with a look. "How do you like them, Rebecca? If you could have eggs any way at all, how would you want them?" The girl's eyes filled with tears so suddenly it startled both of them. "Mama used to make them over easy with butter and salt. She'd make them just for me on my birthday, with toast cut into triangles." "Then that's how you'll have them this morning." "But it's not my birthday." "Don't have to be your birthday for you to deserve something nice." Martha pulled out the butter she'd found in the cold cellar. "Not much, but enough." "Go wake your brothers and sisters. Breakfast is in 10 minutes." The children came down one by one, drawn by the smell of real food cooking. Thomas appeared first, his hair sticking up in all directions. Then the twins, holding hands like they always did. Elizabeth with her rag doll. Even Daniel eventually slouched in, though he wouldn't look at Martha directly. Garrett was last, looking like he'd slept poorly. His eyes had dark circles under them, and he moved stiffly, still favoring the boot Martha had dropped her skillet on. "Morning," he said, his voice rough. "Coffee's hot. Sit." He sat. They all sat, arranged around the table in what was clearly their accustomed places. Garrett at the head, Daniel at the far end. The younger children clustered in the middle where their father and older brother could keep watch over them. Martha served breakfast and watched them eat. The little ones devoured their eggs with the same desperate hunger she'd seen the night before. Rebecca ate her over-easy eggs slowly, carefully, like she was trying to memorize the taste. Daniel ate mechanically, his face a mask. "Mrs. Vale," Thomas said, his mouth half full, "this is really good. Don't talk with your mouth full." He swallowed. "Sorry, but it is good." "Thank you." "Better than Danny's cooking," Samuel piped up. Daniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. "I never cooked. Rebecca did all the cooking." "You made that stew last month," Samuel insisted, "the one that tasted like boots." "It did not taste like boots." "Did too. Even Papa said it was terrible." "I said it needed salt," Garrett corrected, but there was the ghost of a smile on his face. "I never said terrible." "You made a face." "That's enough," Rebecca said quietly, but her cheeks were pink, either from embarrassment or from trying not to laugh. Martha refilled coffee cups and said nothing. This was good, this teasing. Families that could laugh together could heal together. After breakfast, Garrett headed out to check the fences. Daniel followed without being asked, still not speaking to anyone. The younger children scattered to their morning chores, feeding chickens, collecting eggs, mucking out the horse stalls. Rebecca started to clear the table, but Martha stopped her. I need you to do something for me. Yes, ma'am? I need you to make a list of everything that needs doing in this house. Every repair, every bit of cleaning, every task that's been put off because there wasn't time or energy. Can you do that? Rebecca nodded slowly. That's going to be a long list. I expect it will be. Make it anyway. While Rebecca worked on her list, Martha worked on the kitchen. She scrubbed every surface within reach. She organized the pantry, took inventory of what supplies they had, made notes about what they'd need. She found a broom with half its bristles missing and swept anyway. She found a mop and bucket and attacked the floor until her arms ached. The work was familiar, almost meditative. Her body knew what to do, even if her mind wanted to wander to darker places. This was how she'd survived the months after Thomas died, by working until she was too tired to think, too exhausted to cry. She was scrubbing the stovetop when she heard horses approaching, multiple horses, moving fast. Martha straightened, wiping her hands on her apron, and moved to the window. 3 riders were coming up the road, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in town clothes. The woman especially, in a dress that was far too fine for a ranch visit. As they got closer, Martha could see the woman was older, maybe 50, with steel gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. Garrett emerged from the barn, Daniel behind him. The riders stopped in the yard, and the woman dismounted without waiting for assistance. A smooth, practiced movement that suggested she'd been riding all her life. Martha couldn't hear what was being said, but she could read the body language. The woman was doing most of the talking, gesturing broadly at the house and barn. Garrett's shoulders were getting tighter with every word. Daniel had moved to stand beside his father, his jaw clenched. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. Martha dried her hands and walked outside. The conversation stopped when she appeared on the porch. Mrs. Vale, Garrett said, his voice carefully neutral. This is Agnes Blackwell. She and her husband own the mercantile in town. Mrs. Blackwell, this is Martha Vale, our new cook. Agnes Blackwell looked Martha up and down with eyes like chips of ice. I see. How long have you been employed here, Mrs. Vale? Since yesterday. Yesterday. Agnes's mouth pursed like she'd bitten into something sour. And you're already making yourself at home, I see. I'm doing my job, if that's what you mean. Your job. Agnes turned back to Garrett. Mr. Shaw, I don't know what kind of arrangement you've made with this woman, but surely you can see it's inappropriate. A single woman living in a house with 7 children who've just lost their mother. Mrs. Vale is our cook, Garrett interrupted, his voice hard. That's all. That's all? Agnes gestured at the house. She's living here under your roof, unchaperoned. What do you think people will say? I don't give a damn what people say. Well, you should. Those children have already suffered enough scandal with their mother's situation. They don't need more talk. The temperature in the yard dropped 20 degrees. Daniel's hands curled into fists. Garrett's face went absolutely blank in a way that was somehow more frightening than anger. My wife died in childbirth, he said quietly. There was no scandal. There was nothing but a good woman who deserved better than what I could give her. Of course. Agnes's tone suggested she believed nothing of the sort. I meant no disrespect to Caroline's memory. I'm simply thinking of the children. In fact, that's why I'm here. I've been discussing the situation with several concerned members of the community, and we feel it would be best if the children were placed in more stable circumstances. What the hell are you talking about? The younger ones especially, little Nora, the twins, even Elizabeth. They need a proper home, a mother's care. I've spoken to several families in town who would be willing to take them in. No. The word came out like a gunshot. Mr. Shaw, be reasonable. You can barely manage the ranch as it is. How can you possibly care for 7 children on your own? I'm not on my own. I have Rebecca and Daniel. You have 2 children trying to do adults' work. Agnes's voice took on a false sympathy that made Martha's skin crawl. Rebecca should be in school, not running a household. Daniel should be learning a trade, not breaking his back on a failing ranch. And the little ones, she shook her head. They deserve better than this. This is their home. This is a broken house on a dying ranch. Agnes gestured at the peeling paint, the sagging fence, the barn with its gaping roof. Look around you, Mr. Shaw. Look at what you're trying to hold together with spit and prayers. It's not fair to those children. Martha had heard enough. She walked down the porch steps and across the yard until she was standing beside Garrett. "Mrs. Blackwell," she said calmly, "I appreciate your concern for the children, but they have a father who loves them and a home that's being tended. They don't need to be parceled out to strangers." Agnes turned those ice-chip eyes on her. "And who are you to make that determination? You've been here one day." "One day is enough to see they're fed, clothed, and cared for." "Cared for? By whom? A grieving father who can barely keep his ranch running? A 13-year-old girl playing house? Or perhaps you think you're capable of caring for 7 children, Mrs. Vale. I think they're better off here than scattered among people who don't know them." "You don't know anything about this family or this town." Agnes's voice sharpened. "I've known Garrett Shaw since he was a boy. I knew Caroline before she made the mistake of marrying a man who couldn't provide for her properly. I've watched this ranch decline year after year, and now you, a widow woman we know nothing about, show up and presume to tell me what's best for these children?" "Yes," Martha said simply. "That's exactly what I'm doing." For a moment, Agnes looked genuinely shocked. Then her face hardened into something mean and small. "I see. Well, Mr. Shaw, if you insist on keeping this woman in your employment, that's your business. But mark my words, this won't end well. The whole town is watching, and when things fall apart, as they inevitably will, don't expect any help from us." She remounted her horse with the same practiced ease, her 2 companions following suit. As they turned to leave, Agnes looked down at Martha one more time. "You should know, Mrs. Vale, that Ridgefall doesn't take kindly to outsiders, especially outsiders who don't know their place." "Then I guess Ridgefall and I will have to come to an understanding." Agnes rode away, her back stiff with outrage. The dust from the horse's hooves settled slowly in the morning sun. Daniel was the first to speak. "She's going to make trouble." "Let her try." Garrett's voice was still hard, but there was something else in it now. Something like respect when he glanced at Martha. "Thank you for what you said." "I meant it. Those children belong here. Agnes has influence in town. If she decides to make things difficult, then things will be difficult." Martha brushed dust off her apron. "Wouldn't be the first time." She went back inside, back to her scrubbing and organizing, but she could feel the weight of what had just happened settling on her shoulders. Agnes Blackwell had the look of a woman who didn't forgive slights easily, and Martha had just given her a very public one. The rest of the day passed in a blur of work. Martha cleaned until her hands were raw. She cooked a lunch of fried potatoes and salt pork. She started a stew for dinner using the deer meat Daniel had shot. She mended a hole in Thomas's shirt, showed Elizabeth how to properly clean a cast-iron pan, and taught the twins a game her mother had taught her involving string and their fingers. Rebecca worked beside her when she could, asking quiet questions about cooking and cleaning. The girl was smart, Martha realized, quick to learn and careful with details. With proper training, she'd make someone a fine wife someday. But that was years away yet, and in the meantime, she deserved to be a child at least some of the time. Evening came. Dinner was eaten in relative peace, though Daniel still wouldn't look at Martha directly. After the meal, the younger children gathered in the parlor while Rebecca read to them from a battered copy of a storybook. Martha listened while she washed dishes, hearing the girl's soft voice stumble over the harder words, hearing the little ones gasp at the exciting parts. This was what a home should sound like. Not silent and strained, not heavy with grief, just the ordinary sounds of a family being together. Garrett found her in the kitchen after the children had gone to bed. "I wanted to thank you again," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "for standing up to Agnes. No thanks needed. I meant what I said. She won't let it go, you know. She's got a long memory and a longer reach in this town. I've dealt with worse than Agnes Blackwell." Garrett studied her for a moment. "I believe you have. That's quite a reputation you're building, Mrs. Vale. First day on the job, and you've already dropped a skillet on my foot and made an enemy of the most powerful woman in Ridgefall. If I'd wanted an easy job, I would have stayed in the railroad camp." "Why didn't you?" The question caught her off guard. Martha set down the dish she'd been drying and considered how much to say. The camp was temporary. Men moving through, never staying long enough to matter. I got tired of temporary. She picked up another dish. "Your letter said you needed a cook for a family. That sounded like something that might last." "Might last," Garrett repeated. "That's not exactly a ringing endorsement of permanence." "Nothing's permanent, Mr. Shaw." I learned that when my husband coughed up blood one morning and was dead by sunset. All we get is might and maybe, and if we're lucky. He was quiet for a moment. Caroline took 3 days to die. 3 days of bleeding and pain and knowing she wasn't going to make it. She kept apologizing, like it was her fault she was dying, like she'd chosen to leave us. Martha didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only honest response. The baby died too, Garrett continued, his voice flat. A son. We buried them together. I kept thinking Caroline would want that, not to be alone, though I guess it doesn't matter much when you're dead. It matters, Martha said quietly. Maybe not to them, but to the ones left behind. We do things because we need to, not because the dead care. Is that what you did? Things you needed to do? I sold everything that wasn't nailed down, paid off our debts, packed what I could carry, and left the rest. Then I worked my way west doing whatever cooking jobs I could find. She met his eyes. We all survive however we can. Garrett pushed off from the doorframe. Well, I should let you finish. Morning comes early on a ranch. Mr. Shaw? He turned back. Those things Agnes said about your wife, about scandal, what did she mean? His face went carefully blank again. Caroline came from money. Philadelphia money. Her family didn't approve of her marrying a rancher. When she died, there were people who said it was what she deserved for throwing her life away on someone like me. That's cruel. That's the truth. At least that's how some folks see it. He started to leave again, then stopped. Martha? It was the first time he'd used her given name. Yes? You don't have to fight all my battles. I'm not fighting your battles, Garrett. I'm fighting mine. There's a difference. The next morning brought rain. Heavy, driving rain that turned the ranch yard into a mud pit and the road into a river. Martha watched it from the kitchen window while she made breakfast, thinking about Agnes Blackwell and the threat she represented. She didn't have to wait long to see what form that threat would take. The supplies didn't arrive. Garrett had arranged for regular deliveries from the mercantile. Flour, sugar, coffee, all the basics a ranch needed. They were supposed to come every Tuesday, but Tuesday came and went with no wagon, no supplies, nothing. I'll ride to town, Garrett said, his jaw tight. There must be some mistake. But it wasn't a mistake. He returned hours later, soaked through and furious. Agnes claimed she never received my order. Said there must have been some confusion. Then she suggested that if I couldn't keep track of simple things like supply orders, maybe I really wasn't capable of managing 7 children. So she's going to starve us into submission? She's going to make everything as difficult as possible until I give up and let her place the children elsewhere. He slammed his hat down on the table, sending water droplets flying. She's probably got half the town convinced she's doing this for their own good. Martha thought about the nearly empty pantry, about 7 hungry children and a winter coming on, about a powerful woman with a grudge and the means to make that grudge hurt. How much food do we have left? Maybe a week if we're careful, 2 if we stretch it. Then we'll stretch it. Martha, we'll stretch it, she repeated firmly. I've made meals out of less. We won't starve, and we won't give Agnes Blackwell the satisfaction of seeing us beg. She spent the afternoon taking inventory and making plans. They had eggs from the chickens, deer meat in the cold cellar, some dried beans and a bit of cornmeal. Not much, but enough to work with if she was creative. That night dinner was thin but hot. The children ate without complaint, though Martha could see them eyeing the small portions. After they'd gone to bed, she sat at the kitchen table and made lists. What they could forage, what could be hunted, what could be grown quickly in a kitchen garden if the weather held. Rebecca found her there past midnight, still writing by candlelight. You should sleep, Mrs. Vale. So should you. I can't. Rebecca sat down across from her. I keep thinking about what Mrs. Blackwell said, about us being split up, about the twins going to one family and Elizabeth to another and Nora to someone else. I keep thinking about how we'd never see each other again. That's not going to happen. How do you know? Because I won't let it. Neither will your father. Papa can't stop her if the whole town sides with her. And they will. They always side with people like Mrs. Blackwell. Martha set down her pen. Rebecca, let me tell you something. People like Agnes Blackwell have power because other people give it to them. They have money, they have position, and they use both to make everyone believe they're important. But you know what they don't have? What? They don't have the ability to actually take you away from your father unless he gives up. And he's not going to give up. But the supplies, we'll manage without the mercantile. There are other ways to get food. Like what? Like that creek that runs through the eastern pasture. Has anyone been fishing it lately? Rebecca shook her head. Then tomorrow I'll teach Thomas and Daniel how to run a trot line. We'll have fresh fish by evening. Martha tapped her list. And these mushrooms I saw growing near the old oak. They're morels, perfectly safe to eat. And I spotted wild onions near the fence line. And that field beyond the barn could be turned into a vegetable garden if we work fast enough. It's almost October. So we'll plant things that grow quick. Radishes, lettuce, spinach. We won't get a full harvest, but we'll get something. Rebecca stared at her. You really think we can do this? Survive without the town's help? I think we don't have a choice, so yes, we'll do it. The girl's eyes filled with tears, not sad tears, but something else. Relief, maybe. Or hope. Thank you, she whispered. Nothing to thank me for yet. Ask me again when we're all fat and happy. Rebecca actually smiled at that, a real smile that transformed her serious face into something young and bright. Then she went to bed, and Martha went back to her lists. The next 3 weeks were the hardest Martha could remember, and she'd lived through hard times before. They fished the creek and caught enough to make it worth the effort. They foraged for mushrooms and wild greens. Thomas shot 2 rabbits with his father's rifle, and Martha made them stretch for days. She taught the children how to find cattail roots along the stream bank, how to identify edible plants from poisonous ones, how to set snares for small game. The garden went in during a brief dry spell. Everyone worked, even little Nora, carrying rocks to mark the rows. They planted seeds Martha had found in the back of the pantry, probably left over from before Caroline died. Some of the seeds were too old and didn't sprout, but some did, and Martha tended those sprouts like they were made of gold. Agnes struck again the following Sunday. Martha had started attending services at the small church in Ridgefall, mostly because she knew people would talk if she didn't. She sat in the back pew with the children arranged around her like a fortress, feeling the weight of all those eyes watching, judging. After services, Agnes approached with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mrs. Vale, how nice to see you in church. Though I'm surprised you found time, what with all the work I'm sure you have at the ranch. The work gets done, Mrs. Blackwell. Does it? I've heard troubling reports. Agnes pitched her voice to Carrie, making sure the other congregants could hear. People are saying the children look thin, that they're being worked too hard, that they're going without proper meals. Several heads turned their way. Martha felt Rebecca stiffen beside her, felt the younger children press closer. The children are fine. Are they? Because I've also heard that you have them foraging in the woods like animals, making them catch their own food because you can't provide for them properly. We're teaching them useful skills. You're making them desperate. Agnes turned to address the gathering crowd directly. This is exactly what I warned would happen. Mr. Shaw cannot provide for those children. They're going hungry while he pretends everything is fine. It's shameful. What's shameful? Martha said, her voice cutting through the murmurs. Is you using these children as pawns in whatever game you're playing. The churchyard went silent. Agnes's face flushed red. How dare you? How dare I speak the truth? The children are fed, clothed, and cared for. They're learning to work hard and be resourceful. Those are good things, Mrs. Blackwell, not shameful ones. They're learning to be savages because you don't know how to properly run a household. I know how to keep a family together, which is more than you're trying to do. I'm trying to save those children from a situation that will only get worse. Look at you. You can barely afford to feed them now. What happens when winter comes? When the ranch fails completely? Where will they be then? They'll be with their father, where they belong. With a father who can't even keep his wife alive? The words hung in the air like poison. Martha heard Rebecca gasp, heard Daniel make a sound like he'd been punched. Even the onlookers looked shocked at how far Agnes had gone. Garrett, who'd been standing off to the side, went absolutely still. Then he started walking toward them, his face carved from stone. That's enough, he said quietly. Mr. Shaw, I'm simply speaking the truth. You're speaking lies. His voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath. My wife died bringing new life into this world. That's not failure. That's sacrifice. And if you ever speak about her that way again, you and I are going to have a problem. Agnes drew herself up. Are you threatening me? I'm telling you to leave my family alone. Your family is my concern as a member of this community. No. Garrett looked around at all the watching faces. My family is nobody's concern but my own. We don't need your help. We don't want your interference, and we sure as hell don't need your judgment. He turned to Martha and the children. Let's go home. They rode back to the ranch in silence, the wagon wheels churning through mud. Martha could feel the tension radiating off all of them, Garrett's quiet fury, Daniel's barely contained rage, Rebecca's trembling shoulders, the younger children's confusion and fear. But something had shifted, something important. Garrett had defended them, had stood up in front of the whole town and chosen his family over Agnes Blackwell's approval. It should have felt like a victory. Instead, it felt like a declaration of war. That night, after the children were in bed, Martha found Garrett in the barn, checking on the horses. He was brushing down the mare with hard, angry strokes. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, I did. Now she'll come after you even harder. Let her. He didn't stop brushing. I'm tired of people thinking they have a say in how I raise my children. Tired of them looking at me like I'm failing because I couldn't save Caroline. Tired of all of it. She meant what she said, about winter coming, about things getting harder. I know. We'll need more than forage and fish to get through. I know that too. Finally, he stopped and looked at her. But we'll manage. Somehow. How? I don't know yet. But I've got 7 children counting on me to figure it out, and I'm not about to let them down. He set down the brush. You could leave, This isn't your fight. If things get worse, you'll need a cook more than ever. Martha, I told you before, I'm one of the fighting kind. That hasn't changed. He studied her face in the dim lamplight. Why? Why stay when you could find easier work elsewhere? Because I'm tired of running, she wanted to say. Because these children need someone who won't abandon them. Because for the first time since Thomas died, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. But what she said was, because someone has to make sure you don't burn the eggs. He actually laughed at that, a short bark of surprised amusement. Fair enough. They walked back to the house together under a sky full of stars. Tomorrow would bring new problems, new challenges. Agnes Blackwell wasn't done with them. Not by half. Winter was coming, and they were desperately unprepared. But tonight, a man had stood up for his family. Tonight, 7 children were sleeping in their own beds, safe and together. Tonight, a widow and a widower had chosen to keep fighting instead of giving up. It was enough. For now, it had to be enough. The first frost came early that year, coating the ranch in a layer of silver that looked beautiful until you remembered what it meant. Martha stood at the kitchen window, watching the sun burn through the ice on the fence posts, and counted their remaining supplies in her head. 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if they rationed carefully. After that, they'd be eating nothing but what they could catch or kill. Behind her, the children were finishing breakfast, weak coffee, cornmeal mush, and the last of the eggs. Tomorrow, there'd be no eggs. The chickens had stopped laying as the days shortened. Mrs. Vale? Elizabeth appeared at her elbow, holding her empty bowl. Can I have more? Martha looked down at the girl's thin face, at the way her dress hung loose on her frame. Not this morning, honey, but there'll be fish for lunch if your brothers have any luck. I'm still hungry. I know. I'm sorry. Elizabeth nodded and walked away without complaint. That was the worst part. How the children had stopped complaining. They just accepted hunger as the new normal, their eyes getting bigger and their bodies getting smaller. Garrett came in from the barn, his breath misting in the cold air. 3 of the cattle broke through the north fence during the night. Took me and Daniel 2 hours to round them up. How bad is the fence? Bad enough that we'll need new posts to fix it properly, which we can't afford. He poured himself coffee, his hands shaking slightly from cold or exhaustion, or both. I'm going to try the bank in town, see if they'll extend our credit. Martha didn't say what they were both thinking, that the bank was owned by Agnes Blackwell's brother-in-law, and the chances of getting help there were somewhere between slim and none. He left after breakfast, taking Daniel with him. Martha watched them ride away, 2 figures growing smaller against the gray sky, and felt the weight of responsibility settle heavier on her shoulders. 7 children depending on her to keep them fed. A ranch slowly falling apart. And winter coming on fast. She was mixing dough for the midday meal, More cornmeal stretched with water and the last pinch of salt. When Rebecca came running into the kitchen, her face flushed and frightened. "Mrs. Vale, there's smoke coming from the Hendersons' place." Martha looked out the window. Sure enough, a dark column of smoke rose from the neighboring ranch, 3 miles east. Too much smoke for a cooking fire or a controlled burn. "Stay with the little ones," Martha said, already untying her apron. "Don't let them outside until I get back." She saddled one of the horses, clumsily, because she'd never been much for riding, and headed toward the smoke. As she got closer, she could see flames licking up the side of a barn, could hear the panicked screaming of trapped animals. Ben Henderson was in the yard with his 2 sons, throwing buckets of water on the fire. It was hopeless. The barn was already half gone, but they kept trying anyway. Martha dismounted and ran to help. "Where's your wife?" "Took the girls to her sister's yesterday. Thank Christ for that." Ben's face was black with soot. "The horses are still in there. I can hear them, but the smoke—" Without thinking, Martha grabbed an empty feed sack, dunked it in the water trough, and wrapped it around her face. Then she ran into the burning barn. The heat hit her like a physical blow. Smoke choked her lungs even through the wet cloth. She couldn't see more than a few feet, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. But she could hear the horses screaming, and that was enough. She found the first stall by feel, fumbled with the latch, got it open. The horse inside bolted past her, nearly knocking her down. The second stall was already open, empty. The third stall's latch was jammed. Martha yanked on it, her hand slipping on the hot metal. The horse inside was kicking at the walls, mad with fear. The smoke was getting thicker. Part of the roof collapsed behind her with a crash that sent sparks flying. She braced her foot against the wall and pulled with everything she had. The latch gave way so suddenly she fell backward, landing hard on the packed dirt floor. The horse exploded out of the stall, and Martha rolled aside just in time to avoid being trampled. She tried to get up, but her legs wouldn't work right. The smoke was too thick now, the heat too intense. She could feel herself getting dizzy, her vision narrowing to a tunnel. Strong hands grabbed her under the arms and dragged her out into the cold air. She collapsed on the ground, coughing so hard she thought her ribs would crack. Someone was pounding her back. Someone else was pressing a dipper of water to her lips. When her vision cleared, she saw Ben Henderson kneeling beside her, his face a mixture of gratitude and terror. "You damn fool woman! You could have died in there!" "Horses!" Martha managed between coughs. "Got out, all 3, thanks to you." He sat back on his heels. "That was either the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen." "Little of both," Martha croaked. By the time she rode back to Ridgefall Ranch, the sun was setting and her whole body ached. Her hands were blistered from the hot latch. Her lungs felt like they'd been scrubbed with sand. Her dress was ruined, scorched, and torn, and reeking of smoke. The children swarmed her the moment she dismounted, all talking at once. Where had she been? What happened? Why did she smell like fire? "I'm fine," she said, though she wasn't sure that was true. "Where's your father?" "Still in town." Rebecca's eyes were wide with worry. "Mrs. Vale, you're hurt. Your hands—" "Just burns. Nothing serious." Martha let Rebecca lead her into the house. "Draw me some water, would you? I need to wash this smoke off." She was sitting at the kitchen table trying to clean the soot from under her fingernails when Garrett and Daniel returned. They took one look at her and stopped dead. "What the hell happened?" Garrett demanded. "Henderson's barn caught fire. I helped get the horses out." "You went into a burning building. The horses were screaming, so you just—" He broke off, running his hands through his hair. "Christ, Martha, you could have been killed." "But I wasn't." "That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" She was too tired for this conversation, too sore and sick and exhausted. "The horses needed help. I helped them, that's all." Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally, he just shook his head and walked out. Martha heard him on the porch, pacing back and forth, his boots hitting the wood with sharp, angry sounds. Daniel lingered in the doorway. "That was pretty brave," he said quietly. "What you did." It was the first time he'd spoken to her directly in weeks. Martha looked up at him, this angry, grieving boy who'd fought her every step of the way. "Thank you." He nodded and left. Small victories, Martha thought. She'd take them where she could find them. Rebecca brought warm water and clean rags and tended to Martha's burns with surprising skill. Mama taught me, she said when Martha commented on it. She said a ranch wife needed to know how to treat injuries because the doctor was always too far away. Your mama was a smart woman. She was. Rebecca wrapped Martha's hands in clean bandages. She would have liked you, I think. You're both stubborn in the same way. I'll take that as a compliment. It is. That night, Martha lay in her narrow bed and listened to the house settle around her. She could hear the children breathing in their rooms upstairs, could hear Garrett moving around in the room across the hall, the room he'd shared with Caroline, the room he still couldn't bring himself to sleep in. Most nights he dozed in a chair by the fireplace or worked until exhaustion claimed him in the barn. Her hands throbbed where the burns were worst. Her lungs still felt tight. But she was alive, and 3 horses were alive because she'd been too stubborn or too stupid to leave them. She thought about Thomas, about the choices they'd made together, and the life they'd built. She thought about the children sleeping upstairs, about the trust they were slowly, grudgingly starting to place in her. She thought about Garrett's face when he'd seen her covered in soot and ash, the fear in his eyes that had looked almost like something else. Then she stopped thinking and let sleep take her. The next Sunday, word of what she'd done had spread through town. People she'd never met nodded to her after services. Ben Henderson publicly thanked her, his voice thick with emotion. Even some of Agnes Blackwell's circle seemed to soften slightly. But Agnes herself stood apart, her face carved from ice, and Martha knew the real fight was still coming. It came 3 days later. 3 days. Martha was in the kitchen garden harvesting the last of the radishes before the hard freeze hit, when she heard the wagon. 2 men she didn't recognize climbed down and started talking to Garrett by the barn. The conversation grew heated quickly. She could see Garrett's gestures getting sharper, his stance more aggressive. She walked over, wiping dirt from her hands. "Simply here to inspect the property," one of the men was saying. He had the soft hands and clean clothes of someone who'd never done a day's hard labor. "We have concerns about the living conditions for the children." "The children are fine." "That's not what we've heard." The man pulled out a piece of paper. "We've received multiple reports of inadequate food, insufficient clothing, and general neglect. As representatives of the county, we have the authority to investigate." "Representatives of Agnes Blackwell, you mean?" Garrett's voice was dangerous now. "She sent you." "Mrs. Blackwell is a concerned citizen." "Mrs. Blackwell is a meddling busybody who can't stand that I won't bow to her." The second man stepped forward. He was bigger, rougher looking. "Mr. Shaw, we can do this easy or we can do this hard. Either you let us inspect the house and speak to the children, or we come back with the sheriff. Your choice." Martha saw Garrett's hands clench into fists, saw the rage building in him, the desire to throw these men off his property by force if necessary. And she saw how that would end, with charges filed, with ammunition handed to Agnes Blackwell, with the children taken away. She put her hand on his arm. "Let them look." "Martha, let them look. They won't find anything wrong because there's nothing wrong to find." Garrett's jaw worked, but finally he nodded. "Fine. Look all you want." The men went through the house like they were searching for evidence of a crime. They opened cupboards, checked the children's rooms, examined the pantry with its meager supplies. They asked the children questions, careful, probing questions designed to elicit complaints. The children, bless them, gave nothing away. Yes, they had enough to eat. Yes, Mrs. Vale took good care of them. Yes, they were happy here. Even Daniel, who'd resented Martha for weeks, stood firm. Finally, the men had to admit they'd found nothing actionable. The house was clean. The children were clothed and fed. There was no evidence of neglect or abuse. "But the supplies," the soft-handed man insisted. "You're clearly running low on basic necessities." "We're managing," Garrett said flatly. "Are you? Because it looks to me like these children are going without—" "Then maybe you should ask your employer why the mercantile stopped delivering our orders," Martha cut in. "We have money to pay. We've been trying to buy supplies for weeks, but somehow our orders keep getting lost or delayed or forgotten. Strange coincidence, don't you think?" The 2 men exchanged glances. The bigger one shrugged. "That's a matter for the mercantile, ma'am, not our concern." Of course not. They left, but Martha knew it wasn't over. Agnes was probing for weaknesses, testing their defenses. Next time, she'd strike harder. That night, Garrett called a family meeting. They gathered in the parlor, all 7 children and Martha, while Garrett stood by the fireplace with his arms crossed. "You all did well today," he said. "I'm proud of you. But things are going to get worse before they get better. Agnes Blackwell won't stop until she gets what she wants. And what she wants is you kids split up and sent away." "We're not leaving," Daniel said fiercely. "I know you don't want to. But if she can prove I'm not providing for you properly, the law will give her what she wants." Garrett looked at each of them in turn. "So we need to be smarter, tougher. We need to stick together and not give her any ammunition." "How?" Rebecca asked. "By making it through the winter. By showing the town that we can survive without their help. By being a family." His voice softened. "I know I haven't been the father you deserved since your mother died. I've been trying to keep the ranch running, and I let the house fall apart. I let you kids take on burdens you shouldn't have had to carry. But that ends now. We're going to fight for this family, all of us, together." Little Nora, who'd been sitting in Rebecca's lap, spoke up in her tiny voice. "What about Mrs. Vale? Is she fighting too?" Garrett looked at Martha. "That's up to Mrs. Vale." 7 pairs of eyes turned to her, waiting, hoping. Even Daniel looked like he was holding his breath. Martha thought about how easy it would be to leave, to find another position somewhere peaceful, somewhere without vengeful town matriarchs and starving children and impossible odds. Somewhere she could just cook and clean and not have her heart broken every time one of these kids looked at her with trust in their eyes. "I'm fighting," she said simply. Nora smiled. Rebecca let out a breath she'd been holding. Even Daniel's shoulders relaxed slightly. "Then we'll make it," Garrett said. "Somehow." But somehow was getting harder to imagine. 2 days later, the well water started tasting strange, metallic, and slightly bitter. Garrett tested it and found sediment that shouldn't have been there. Someone had thrown something down the well. Not enough to make them seriously ill, but enough to make the water barely drinkable. "Could have been an accident," Garrett said, but his face said he didn't believe it. "Could have been," Martha agreed, but it wasn't. They started hauling water from the creek a mile away. It added hours to each day, but what choice did they have? Then one of the cows died. Just collapsed in the field one morning, no warning, no visible cause. Garrett examined the carcass and found signs of poisoning. "Someone fed her something," he said grimly, "something that killed her slow." Daniel wanted to ride into town and confront Agnes directly. Garrett had to physically restrain him. "That's what she wants," he said. "She wants us to lash out, give her an excuse to call the sheriff, get me arrested. We can't give her that." "So we just take it?" Daniel's voice cracked with fury. "We just let her destroy everything. We outsmart her. We outlast her." Garrett's voice was hard. "And we don't give up." But Martha could see the toll it was taking on him. The lines on his face were deeper. He'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. Some nights she heard him pacing until dawn, trying to figure out how to keep his family together against forces that seemed determined to tear them apart. The next Sunday, everything came to a head. They were in church, sitting in their usual back pew, when the pastor asked if anyone had announcements to make. Agnes Blackwell stood up, her face serene and concerned. "I'd like to speak about the Shaw children," she said, her voice carrying through the small building. "As many of you know, I've been worried about their welfare for some time. Despite my best efforts to help, their situation continues to deteriorate. The ranch is failing. They're going without adequate food and supplies. And their father, much as we all respect him, is simply not capable of providing the care they need." Murmurs rippled through the congregation, some sympathetic, some uncertain. Martha felt Rebecca stiffen beside her, felt the younger children press closer. "I've tried to help quietly," Agnes continued. "I've offered to place the children with good families who can provide for them properly. But Mr. Shaw has refused every offer. His pride is preventing him from doing what's best for his own children." More murmurs, more heads nodding. "So I'm asking this community to help me help them. To speak up. To let Mr. Shaw know that we're concerned, that we want what's best for those poor motherless children." She sat down satisfied. The pastor looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Does anyone else wish to speak on this matter?" Silence. Long, heavy silence that felt like judgment. Then Garrett stood up. Martha's heart clenched. She'd seen him angry before, seen him hurt and grieving and desperate. But she'd never seen him like this. Utterly calm, utterly certain, his voice steady and clear as he addressed the entire congregation. "You're right that my children lost their mother," he said. You're right that it's been hard. You're right that I'm not perfect. He looked directly at Agnes. But you're wrong about everything else. He turned to face the congregation. My children are fed. Maybe not fancy meals, but they're fed. They have clothes and a roof over their heads. They have each other, and they have me. Is it ideal? No. Is it easy? Hell no. But it's their home, and I'm their father, and that means something. Mr. Shaw. The pastor tried to interrupt, but Garrett kept talking. You want to know why we're struggling? Because Agnes Blackwell has done everything in her power to make sure we fail. She's blocked our supplies from the mercantile. She sent men to harass us. Someone poisoned our well and killed one of our cattle. And now she stands up here and pretends she's doing this out of concern? Gasps throughout the church. Agnes's face went red, then white. That's a serious accusation, the pastor said. It's the truth. And everyone in this town knows it. They're just too scared of her to say it out loud. Garrett's voice rose. Well, I'm not scared. My children need a father who'll fight for them, and that's what I'm going to do. You can judge me all you want. You can believe Agnes's lies, but you can't take my children away from me unless I let you, and I'm never going to let you. He sat down. The church was absolutely silent. Then Martha stood up. Every eye in the building turned to her. She could feel the weight of their judgment, their curiosity, their skepticism. But she'd faced worse than small-town gossip. I'm Martha Vale, she said, though most of them already knew. I've been cooking for the Shaw family for 2 months now, and I want you all to know something. She looked directly at Agnes. Those children are the best-behaved, hardest-working, most loving kids I've ever had the privilege to know. They've been through hell, and they're still standing. They're still fighting. And if you think splitting them up and sending them to strangers is what's best for them, then you don't know anything about family. She paused, letting that sink in. Mr. Shaw isn't perfect. Neither am I. Neither are any of you. But he loves those children, and he's doing everything he can to keep them safe and together. That should be enough. That should be more than enough. She sat down. Her hands were shaking, but she'd said what needed saying. The pastor cleared his throat. Well, that was impassioned. I'd like to say something. It was Rebecca. The 13-year-old girl stood up, her voice trembling but clear. My mother died 8 months ago, she said. It was the worst thing that ever happened to us. For a long time I thought nothing would ever be good again. But then Mrs. Vale came and she taught me that it's okay to need help, that asking for help isn't the same as giving up. She looked at Agnes. You say you want to help us, but you don't. You just want to prove that my father can't do this on his own. Well, he's not on his own. He has us. He has Mrs. Vale, and we're going to be fine. One by one, the other children stood. Even little Nora, held in Daniel's arms, looking solemnly at the congregation. We're staying together, Daniel said, his voice hard. No matter what. The church erupted into whispers and arguments. Some people were nodding, moved by the children's words. Others looked angry, scandalized. Agnes Blackwell sat frozen, her carefully constructed narrative falling apart. The pastor tried to restore order, but it was too late. The spell was broken. The town had seen the Shaw family stand up for themselves, had heard the truth spoken aloud. They left church early, not waiting for the service to end. As they filed out, Martha noticed a few sympathetic faces. Ben Henderson gave Garrett a nod of support. A couple of the other ranchers looked thoughtful, like they were reconsidering what they'd heard. But Agnes's face was pure fury. They rode home in this wagon, nobody speaking, all of them processing what had just happened. Martha knew they'd made an enemy for life, but they'd also drawn a line in the sand. They'd told the truth. Sometimes that was all you could do. That night, after the children were in bed, Garrett found Martha in the kitchen. She was making bread for the next day, kneading dough with her bandaged hands. Thank you, he said quietly, for what you said in church. I meant every word. I know. That's what makes it... He trailed off, struggling for words. Caroline used to say that the strongest people were the ones who fought for others, not themselves. I think she would have liked you. I would have liked her too. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound the soft thump of dough being worked. This isn't over, Garrett said. Agnes won't forgive what happened today. No, she won't. Things are going to get worse. Probably. You could still leave. No one would blame you. Martha shaped the dough into loaves and set them to rise. Garrett, I've told you before, I'm not leaving. Stop asking. I just want you to know you have a choice. I've made my choice. She wiped flour from her hands. Now you should get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a long day. He nodded and started to leave, then turned back. Martha, when this is all over, if we make it through, I want you to know that you'll always have a place here, for as long as you want it. I know, she said softly. Now go to bed before you fall asleep standing up. She finished the bread and banked the fire. Then she walked to the window and looked out at the dark ranch. Somewhere out there, Agnes Blackwell was plotting her next move. Somewhere out there, winter was coming closer every day. Somewhere out there, danger was gathering. But inside this house, 7 children were sleeping safe and warm. Inside this house, a broken family was slowly knitting itself back together. Inside this house, hope was still alive. Martha blew out the lamp and went to her room. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought. Tonight, they were still together. Tonight, they were still fighting. Tonight, that was enough. 3 days after the confrontation in church, Martha woke to the smell of smoke. Not cooking smoke. Not the clean scent of wood burning in a stove. This was thick and acrid, the kind of smoke that meant something was wrong. She threw on her dress and ran outside, barefoot in the freezing pre-dawn darkness. The barn was ablaze, flames shooting 30 feet into the air, turning the night orange and hellish. "Garrett!" she screamed. He was already there, already shouting orders at Daniel. The older children were stumbling out of the house, confused and terrified. The horses were screaming inside the barn, that terrible, almost human sound of animals in mortal fear. "Get water!" Garrett yelled. "Daniel, help me with the horses," Martha said, already running. "Martha, no!" But she was already at the barn door, already wrapping her shawl around her face, already diving into the inferno for the second time in her life. The heat was worse than Henderson's barn had been, the smoke thicker. The fire had a head start this time, and it was hungry. She found the first horse by sound. The mare was kicking her stall to pieces, wide-eyed with terror. Martha fumbled with the latch, burned her hand on the metal, got it open anyway. The horse bolted past her, nearly trampling her in its panic. 2 more horses. She could hear them deeper in the barn, past the worst of the flames. The heat was unbearable now. Her lungs felt like they were full of glass. But she pushed forward, one hand on the wall to guide her through the smoke. The second horse was Thomas's gelding. The animal was calmer, trusting, and it followed her out with only gentle urging. As they emerged into the yard, Martha saw Daniel trying to hold Garrett back from running in after her. "The bay," she croaked, "still inside." "I'll get him," Garrett said, already moving. "No." Martha pushed the gelding toward Daniel. "Too dangerous. Roof's going to collapse." "Then how the hell are you going in?" "I'm smaller, faster." She didn't wait for permission, just turned and ran back into the burning barn. The roof was groaning overhead, timbers cracking with sounds like gunshots. Embers rained down, burning holes in her dress, in her hair. The bay was in the last stall, the one farthest from the door, the one with flames between it and safety. Martha grabbed a horse blanket from a hook, dunked it in the water trough just inside the door, and wrapped it around herself. Then she ran through the fire. The heat was so intense it felt cold. She couldn't breathe, couldn't see, couldn't think. But she could hear the bay stallion, and that was enough. She slammed into the stall door hard enough to bruise her shoulder, got the latch open on the 3rd try, and grabbed the horse's halter. "Come on, you bastard! Move!" The stallion reared, fighting her. He was too scared to think, too panicked to understand she was trying to save him. Martha hung onto the halter with both hands, letting her weight pull his head down. "I said move!" She slapped him hard across the nose. Probably the worst thing you could do to a frightened horse, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The shock of it seemed to snap him out of his panic. He followed her toward the flames, hesitating only once before she yanked him forward. They burst out of the barn just as the roof collapsed behind them with a roar like thunder. The force of it threw Martha forward. She landed hard on frozen ground. The wind knocked out of her, the bay stallion's hooves inches from her head. Hands pulled her away from the thrashing horse. Garrett's face appeared above her, black with soot, his eyes wild. "You stupid, crazy, impossible woman!" "Horses," she managed. "All 3?" "All 3." Thanks to you. He was shaking, whether from fear or anger or relief she couldn't tell. Don't you ever do that again. Ever. Someone has to save the stupid animals. Let them burn next time. You don't mean that. The hell I don't. But he was helping her sit up, checking her for injuries with hands that trembled. You're burned. Your hands, your arms. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're... He broke off, looking past her at the barn, or what was left of it. The entire structure had collapsed into a pile of burning timbers. Everything they'd stored there, hay, tools, feed, the wagon, all of it was gone. The children had formed a bucket line from the well, passing water to throw on the flames. It was futile. The barn was lost, but they kept at it anyway, trying to keep the fire from spreading to the house or the other outbuildings. Martha watched them work. These children who'd learned too young that life could take everything from you without warning. Rebecca organizing the little ones. Daniel working alongside his father like a man grown. Even Nora carrying a cup of water, so determined to help. It took until dawn to get the fire under control. By then, the barn was nothing but smoking ruins and charred timber. The horses were safe in the corral, shaken but unharmed, and the family stood in the yard, exhausted and soot-covered, looking at the destruction. How did it start? Daniel asked. Garrett walked the perimeter of what was left, examining the debris. When he came back, his face was grim. Someone set it. You can see where they piled kindling against the back wall, and there's lamp oil. You can smell it under the smoke. Who would... Rebecca started, then stopped. They all knew who. I'm riding to town, Garrett said. I'm going to the sheriff. And tell him what? Martha interrupted. That you think someone burned your barn? You have no proof it was Agnes. I know it was her. Knowing isn't proof. The sheriff is her cousin, Garrett. He's not going to arrest her on suspicion. Then what do we do? Just let her destroy everything we have? Martha looked at the ruined barn, at the frightened children, at the ranch that was barely holding together. We survive. We rebuild. We show her that we can't be broken. With what money? With what materials? Garrett's voice cracked. That barn had everything, Martha. The feed for the winter, the tools we need for spring planting, the wagon we use to haul supplies. We can't rebuild. We're finished. We're not finished until we quit. Look around you. This is done. Agnes won. She finally did it. She found a way to destroy us. He turned away, his shoulders slumped. Maybe she's right. Maybe the kids would be better off somewhere else. Somewhere safe. Somewhere that isn't falling apart around them. Papa, no. Rebecca's voice was small and scared. You promised we'd stay together. I know what I promised, but sometimes promises aren't enough. Martha felt something crack inside her chest. After everything they'd been through, after all the fighting and struggling and refusing to give up, he was going to surrender. He was going to let Agnes win. Thomas would be ashamed of you, she said quietly. Garrett turned to stare at her. What did you say? I said my husband would be ashamed. He spent his whole life fighting for what was his, fighting drought and debt and a world that didn't care if he lived or died. And he never quit, not once, not until his body gave out and he didn't have a choice anymore. Her voice shook. You still have a choice, Garrett. You can choose to fight. I'm tired of fighting. So is Thomas. So am I. So is everyone who's ever had to fight for something that mattered. But you do it anyway. You fight anyway. Because the alternative is letting the bastards win. She walked over to him, close enough that the children couldn't hear what she said next. Those kids have already lost their mother. If you give them up now, if you let Agnes take them, they'll lose their father too. Maybe not physically, but in every way that matters. Is that what you want? To be the man who gave up? Garrett's eyes were wet. I don't know how to fix this. Then we'll figure it out together. But we don't quit. Not today. He looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. Then he nodded slowly. All right, we don't quit. They spent the morning salvaging what they could from the barn ruins. It wasn't much. Some tools with burned handles, a few bits of usable metal. Everything else was ash and ruin. Martha was sorting through a pile of debris when she found it. A piece of cloth that didn't belong. It was fine fabric, the kind a wealthy woman might wear. And it had been caught on a nail near where the fire started. She showed it to Garrett without a word. He studied it, his jaw tightening. This proves someone was here, someone who could afford expensive cloth. It proves someone tore their dress sneaking around your barn. That's all. It's not enough for the sheriff. Then we'll find something that is enough. That night, Garrett and Daniel took turns watching the ranch. If someone had been bold enough to burn the barn, they might come back to finish the job. Martha wanted to help keep watch, but Garrett insisted she rest. You saved 3 horses and nearly got yourself killed. That's enough for one day. She was too exhausted to argue, but sleep wouldn't come. She lay in her narrow bed, listening to the house settle, thinking about fire and smoke, and how quickly everything could be taken away. Around midnight, she heard movement outside her window. Soft footsteps. Someone trying to be quiet. Martha slipped out of bed and peered through the curtain. A figure was moving through the darkness toward the house, carrying something. She couldn't see who it was, but they were too small to be a man. A woman, then. She grabbed her iron skillet, still the most reliable weapon she owned, and eased out the kitchen door. The figure was at the well now, pouring something from a bottle. Martha smelled it before she saw what it was. The same bitter, metallic scent their water had taken on weeks ago. Poison. Someone was poisoning the well again. "That's far enough," Martha said, stepping out of the shadows. The figure spun around. It wasn't Agnes Blackwell. It was a man Martha had seen around town. Young, rough-looking, the kind who do dirty work for money. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "I'm the woman who's about to crack your skull if you don't drop that bottle." He looked at the skillet in her hand and laughed. "You think you can scare me with a piece of cookware? I think you'd be surprised what damage a 10-inch cast iron skillet can do." Martha took a step closer. "Drop it, now." He moved faster than she expected, lunging at her with the bottle raised like a weapon. Martha swung the skillet in a wide arc that caught him in the ribs. He went down hard, the bottle flying from his hand to shatter on the frozen ground. She stood over him, skillet raised, while he gasped for air. "Daniel!" she shouted. "Garrett! Someone get out here!" The kitchen door banged open. Garrett and Daniel came running, the older boy carrying a rifle. They took in the scene, Martha standing over the man with her skillet, the broken bottle leaking poison into the dirt. "Well," Garrett said, "I'll be damned." They tied the man's hands and dragged him into the barn, or what was left of it. In the lamplight, Martha could see his face clearly. He looked scared now, all his bravado gone. "Who paid you?" Garrett demanded. "I don't know what you're talking about." Daniel stepped forward and shoved the rifle barrel under the man's chin. "My father asked you a question." "Danny, easy," Garrett said, but he didn't sound like he really meant it. "Someone paid you to poison our well," Martha said. "Same person who paid you to kill our cattle. Same person who paid you to burn our barn. Who was it?" "I didn't burn no barn." "You're lying." Garrett grabbed the man's shirt. "You burned my barn. You could have killed my children. You could have killed—" He broke off, his voice shaking with rage. "Tell me who paid you, or so help me." All right. All right." The man's composure cracked. "It was her, the Blackwell woman. She said you needed to learn a lesson, said your kids would be better off without you." "She told you to burn the barn?" "She said make it look like an accident, said you were too stupid to maintain your property and eventually something would catch fire. I was just hurrying it along." Garrett let go of him so suddenly the man nearly fell. "You could have killed my son. He sleeps above the barn most nights." The man paled. "I didn't know." "You didn't care." Martha's voice was cold. "You were willing to murder children for money." "I wasn't trying to hurt nobody. I just wanted the barn gone, like she said. I checked. There wasn't anyone in there." "But there were horses. 3 horses that would have burned alive if Mrs. Vale hadn't risked her life to save them." The man looked at Martha with new understanding. "You're the one who went in after them?" "Twice. Once at Henderson's place, once here." "You're crazy." "Maybe. But I'm not the one who's going to hang for arson and attempted murder." His face went white. "Hang? No, wait. I'll testify. I'll tell the sheriff everything. Just don't—" "You'll tell the sheriff exactly what you told us," Garrett said. "Every word. And if you try to change your story or protect Agnes Blackwell, I will personally make sure you regret it. Are we clear?" The man nodded frantically. They locked him in his root cellar and waited for dawn. As soon as the sun was up, Garrett rode to town with their prisoner tied to a horse behind him. Martha stayed at the ranch, trying to keep the children calm, and the morning routine as normal as possible. But nothing felt normal. The burned barn was a constant reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. And now that they had proof of Agnes's involvement, Martha knew the real fight was just beginning. Garrett returned late in the afternoon, his face dark with anger. "The sheriff arrested him," he said, "took his confession. But when I mentioned Agnes's name, he got real quiet, said he'd look into it, but there wasn't enough evidence to bring charges against her." "He's protecting her." "Of course he is, they're family." Garrett slammed his fist against the table. "Even with a confession, even with proof, she's going to walk away clean. What about the arsonist? What will happen to him? He'll go to trial, probably hang, if they can prove he meant to hurt someone. But Agnes?" Garrett shook his head. "She'll claim she never told him to burn anything, that he was acting on his own. And without witnesses or evidence linking her directly to the crime, there's nothing we can do." Martha thought about the scrap of cloth she'd found, about the pattern of harassment that had escalated to attempted murder, about a woman who was willing to destroy a family to prove a point. "Then we go public," she said. We tell everyone what happened. Make it impossible for her to hide behind the sheriff." "Who's going to believe us? Her word against ours, and she's got half the town in her pocket." "Maybe, but we have something she doesn't." "What's that?" "The truth. And people who've seen us fighting to keep this family together." Martha met his eyes. "Agnes has been working in the shadows, using money and influence to hurt us. But what if we bring it into the light? What if we make everyone see what she's really been doing?" "How?" "The town meeting. It's next week, right? Everyone will be there." Garrett considered this. "You want to accuse her in front of the whole town?" "I want to tell our story. Let people decide for themselves who to believe." "That's risky. If it backfires, if people side with her, then we'll be no worse off than we are now." Martha touched his arm. "But if we do nothing, she wins. At least this way we go down fighting." He smiled grimly. "You really don't give up, do you?" "Not in my nature." The next few days were tense. Word had spread about the arrest, and people in town were talking. Some sympathized with the Shaw family. Others insisted there must be more to the story. And Agnes Blackwell herself maintained a dignified silence, which somehow made her seem more sympathetic than if she'd defended herself. But there were cracks in her armor. Ben Henderson spoke publicly about how Martha had saved his horses, at great risk to herself. A few other ranchers mentioned the suspicious timing of the Shaw family's troubles, and the storekeeper who'd been forced to stop delivering supplies to Ridgefall Ranch quietly admitted that Agnes had pressured him. It wasn't much, but it was something. 3 days before the town meeting, little Nora got sick. It started with a cough. Just a small, dry cough that Martha didn't think much of at first. Lots of children coughed in the fall, but by evening, Nora was feverish and struggling to breathe. By midnight, she was burning up. Martha sat beside her bed, wiping her face with cool cloths, while Rebecca hovered in the doorway, looking terrified. "Is she going to die?" the girl whispered. "No, she's not going to die. Mama got sick like this. At the end, before the baby came, she had a fever and couldn't breathe right, and this is different, Rebecca. Nora just has a bad cold. We're going to bring the fever down, and she's going to be fine." But the fever wasn't coming down. If anything, it was getting worse. By 2 a.m, Nora was delirious, crying for her mother, thrashing in the bed. Her breathing was shallow and rapid, and when Martha listened to her chest, she could hear a rattle that made her blood run cold. Pneumonia. The child had pneumonia. She found Garrett dozing in a chair by the fire. "We need a doctor." He came fully awake. "How bad?" "Bad. She needs medicine, and I don't have it." "The doctor is in town. That's an hour's ride there and back, assuming he's even home and willing to come." "Then you'd better ride fast." Garrett was out the door in minutes. Martha went back to Nora's bedside and did the only thing she could. She fought. She bathed the little girl with cool water. She propped her up to help her breathe. She dripped water between her lips to keep her from getting dehydrated. And she talked to her, soft and constant, telling her stories about Kansas and the farm she'd left behind, about the husband she'd lost and the life she'd built. "You have to stay with us, Nora. Your brothers and sisters need you. Your papa needs you. And I—" Her voice caught. "I need you too, sweetheart. So you keep fighting. You hear me? You keep fighting. The child's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy with fever. Mama? I'm here, baby. Martha smoothed the damp hair back from her forehead. I'm right here. Don't leave. I won't, I promise. She stayed through the dark hours, through the time when life feels most fragile and death seems to be waiting just outside the window. She stayed while the other children slept, while the house was silent except for Nora's labored breathing. She stayed because she'd promised, and because this tiny girl had somehow worked her way into Martha's heart, despite all her best efforts to keep some distance. Dawn was breaking when she heard horses. Garrett burst through the door with a gray-haired man carrying a medical bag. Where is she? Upstairs, first room on the left. The doctor examined Nora quickly, his face grave. Pneumonia. How long has she been like this? Since yesterday evening, the fever got bad around midnight. He pulled bottles from his bag, mixing a tincture with practiced efficiency. Get this into her, 2 drops every hour, and keep doing what you're doing with the cool water. Her fever needs to break, or, I know. Martha took the bottle. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Garrett, for the 3 times normal fee he promised me. The doctor gave her a sharp look. You know how to care for someone this sick? I've done it before. Then I'll leave her in your hands. But if the fever doesn't break by tonight, send for me again. And pray, Mrs. Vale. This little one is going to need all the help she can get. Martha didn't believe much in prayer anymore. Not since Thomas had died despite every prayer she'd offered up. But she believed in stubbornness, in refusing to quit, in fighting for every breath and every heartbeat. So that's what she did. She administered the medicine. She kept Nora cool and hydrated. She stayed awake through another day and another night, fueled by coffee and fear and a determination that bordered on fury. This child was not going to die. Not on Martha's watch. Not after everything they'd all been through. Rebecca helped when she could, bringing fresh water and clean cloths. The other children tiptoed around, speaking in whispers, their faces frightened. Garrett checked in every hour, his expression growing more haggard each time. You should rest, he said around midnight. Let me take over for a while. Not yet. The fever's still too high. Martha, you're going to collapse. Then I'll collapse after she's better. Somewhere around 3 in the morning, something changed. Nora's breathing eased slightly. Her skin felt fractionally cooler. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Martha hope. By dawn, the fever had broken. The little girl opened her eyes, really opened them, focused and aware, and looked at Martha with confusion. Where's Papa? Martha nearly wept with relief. He's downstairs. Do you want me to get him? I'm thirsty. Of course you are. Let's get you some water. She helped Nora sit up and drink, then sent Rebecca to fetch Garrett. When he saw his youngest daughter sitting up and asking for food, his face crumpled. He sat on the edge of the bed and gathered her into his arms, holding her like he was afraid she might disappear. You scared me, little bird. I didn't mean to. I know, but you're better now. That's all that matters. Martha left them alone and went downstairs. Her whole body ached. Her eyes felt like they'd been scrubbed with sand. But Nora was going to be okay, and that was worth any amount of exhaustion. She was standing at the kitchen window, watching the sun rise over the burned wreckage of the barn, when she heard footsteps behind her. It was Daniel. Is Nora really going to be all right? He asked. Yes, the fever broke. She'll need time to recover, but she'll be fine. He nodded, then stood there awkwardly, like he wanted to say something else but didn't know how. What is it, Daniel? I was wrong about you, he said finally. I thought you were just another person who'd come and go. I thought you didn't really care about us. But you do, don't you? You stayed up 2 nights straight for Nora. You went into a burning barn for our horses. You fight for us like we're your own family. Martha's throat tightened. You are my family. All of you. Even me? Even though I was awful to you? Even you. He ducked his head, embarrassed by the emotion in his voice. Thank you. For not giving up on us. For not giving up on Nora. I never will, Daniel. That's a promise. He nodded and left, and Martha finally let herself cry. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of knowing they'd all made it through another crisis. That the family was still intact. That despite everything Agnes Blackwell had thrown at them, they were still standing. The town meeting was in 2 days. The real confrontation was still coming. But right now, in this moment, they'd won something important. They'd proven they could survive anything as long as they stayed together. And Martha Vale, widow and cook and accidental mother to 7 children who weren't hers by blood, but were hers in every way that mattered, finally allowed herself to rest. The town meeting was held in the largest building Ridgefall had to offer, a wooden hall that served as everything from courtroom to dance floor, depending on what the community needed. By the time Martha and the Shaw family arrived, every bench was full, and people lined the walls 3 deep. Word had spread about what was going to happen, and nobody wanted to miss it. Agnes Blackwell sat in the front row, surrounded by her allies. She wore a dark blue dress that probably cost more than Martha had earned in a year, and her face was composed into an expression of patient suffering, the picture of a good woman being falsely accused. Martha's hands tightened on her worn shawl. She'd dressed in her best, which wasn't saying much, and the children were clean and presentable despite having so little. Nora sat in Rebecca's lap, still pale from her illness, but recovering. The other children flanked Garrett on either side, a united front. The mayor called the meeting to order and went through the usual business: road repairs, a dispute over water rights, plans for the harvest festival. But everyone knew what they were really there for. The tension in the room built with each mundane topic, people shifting in their seats and glancing between the Shaws and the Blackwells. Finally, the mayor cleared his throat. I understand there's been some difficulty between the Shaw family and certain members of our community. Mr. Shaw, you requested time to speak? Garrett stood. Martha could see his hands shaking slightly, but his voice was steady when he spoke. Most of you know me. You knew my wife Caroline, and you know my children. We've been part of Ridgefall for 10 years, and in that time, we've tried to be good neighbors. We've helped when help was needed, and we've minded our own business. He paused, looking around the room. But 6 months ago, someone decided our business was their concern. After my wife died, Agnes Blackwell approached me about placing my children with other families. I refused. And since then, my family has faced a campaign of harassment that escalated to arson and attempted murder. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Agnes's expression didn't change, but Martha saw her hands tighten in her lap. That's a serious charge, Mr. Shaw, the mayor said carefully. It's the truth. Our supplies were cut off by the mercantile, on Mrs. Blackwell's orders. Our well was poisoned, one of our cattle was killed, and 3 nights ago someone burned our barn to the ground. That same person confessed that Agnes Blackwell paid him to do it. Lies. Agnes stood, her voice cutting through the murmurs. This is exactly what I warned you all about. A desperate man making wild accusations to deflect from his own failures. I have done nothing but try to help those poor children, and this is how I'm repaid? You call burning a barn helping? Garrett's voice rose. You call poisoning a well helping? My daughter almost died because we couldn't afford medicine, and that's your fault, Agnes. You made sure we had nothing. You tried to destroy us. I tried to save those children from a father who can't provide for them. Agnes turned to address the crowd. Look at them. Thin, exhausted, living in squalor. Is that what you call adequate care? Is that what... We're thin because you starved us. Daniel stood up, his young voice shaking with fury. We're exhausted because we've been fighting to survive everything you threw at us. And we're still here. We're still together, despite everything you did. Agnes looked at him with something like pity. Poor boy. You've been taught to blame me for your father's inadequacies, but the truth is you're a liar. Rebecca stood now too, holding Nora close. You don't care about us. You never did. You just wanted to prove you were more powerful than Papa. Well, you're not, because we're still here, and we're still a family. One by one, the other children stood. Even little Nora, still weak from her illness, straightened in Rebecca's arms and stared at Agnes with those solemn blue eyes. The sight of 7 children, thin and worn but unbroken, standing united against her seemed to shake something in Agnes's composure. Her face flushed red. This is absurd. I will not stand here and be accused by children who've been coached. Nobody coached us, Thomas said. You tried to break us apart, but we won't let you. Martha watched the crowd's reaction. Some faces showed sympathy for the children. Others looked uncertain, torn between long-standing loyalty to Agnes and the evidence before their eyes. The mayor looked deeply uncomfortable, like he wished he was anywhere else. Then Ben Henderson stood up from the back of the room. I'd like to say something, he announced. The mayor nodded, looking relieved to have someone else take the floor. Ben walked to the front, his weathered face serious. 3 weeks ago, my barn caught fire. Mrs. Vale here risked her life to save my horses. She went into that burning building without thinking twice, and she got all 3 animals out safely. He looked directly at Agnes. You weren't there that day, Mrs. Blackwell. You didn't offer to help rebuild. You didn't bring food or supplies. But Mrs. Vale did. This woman who supposedly can't manage a household, who supposedly isn't fit to care for children, she's the one who showed up with a basket of food the next day. Food she couldn't spare given how little the Shaws have. She's the one who helped. That's very touching, Agnes said coldly. But one act of recklessness doesn't change. It wasn't reckless. It was brave. And it's not one act. Ben crossed his arms. I've been watching what's happening to the Shaw family. I've seen how they've been cut off from supplies. I've heard the rumors you've been spreading about Garrett's fitness as a father. And I've kept my mouth shut because I didn't want trouble. But I'm done being quiet. He turned to face the crowd. Agnes Blackwell has been using her money and influence to destroy a family that never did her any harm. And we've all let her do it because we were afraid of crossing her. Well, I'm not afraid anymore. What she's doing is wrong, and everyone here knows it. Hear, hear, someone called from the back. Martha recognized the storekeeper who'd been forced to stop their deliveries. Agnes's face went pale, then red, then pale again. You have no proof of these allegations. None. One man's confession from a criminal trying to save himself. That's all you have. And you want to destroy my reputation based on that? We have more than that. Garrett pulled out the scrap of cloth Martha had found. This was at the scene of the fire, caught on a nail near where it started. Expensive fabric, the kind you favor, Agnes. That could be anyone's? It could be, but it isn't. He held it up for the crowd to see. Anyone here recognize this pattern, this quality of cloth? Several women in the crowd nodded. One of them spoke up. That's from Thompson's store in the city. Special order. Agnes bought a dress in that fabric just last month. I remember because she was showing it off at the social. Agnes's mouth opened and closed. For the first time, she looked genuinely rattled. Even if that is from my dress, which I'm not admitting, it doesn't prove anything. I could have torn it anywhere, anytime. This is circumstantial at best. Then let's talk about the man who confessed, the mayor said quietly. He'd been listening to everything with growing concern. Carl Jessup. He's in jail right now, awaiting trial for arson, and he swears you paid him to burn the Shaw barn. Are you saying he's lying? Of course he's lying. He's trying to implicate me to reduce his own sentence. Funny thing about that, the sheriff, Agnes's own cousin, stepped forward looking deeply uncomfortable. I've been doing some checking. Turns out Carl Jessup deposited $50 in the bank the day before the fire. $50 is a lot of money for a man who barely scrapes by doing odd jobs. When I asked him where he got it, he said someone paid him for work, but he couldn't say what work or who paid him. He looked at Agnes with something like regret. Then I checked with the bank. You withdrew $50 that same week. Cash. Unusual for you, since you typically pay for everything with credit. The room went absolutely silent. Agnes's face was white now, her composure cracking. I needed cash for household expenses. That's not a crime. No, it's not. But combined with everything else, the testimony, the fabric, the timing, it's starting to look like more than coincidence. The sheriff's voice was heavy. Agnes, I've known you my whole life. I don't want to believe you'd do something like this, but I can't ignore the evidence. There is no evidence. There's just the ravings of a desperate family and a criminal trying to save his own neck. Agnes looked around the room, her eyes wild. Are you all really going to believe them over me? Over everything I've done for this town? What have you done for this town? Martha spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but clear. You've used your money to control people. You've punished anyone who didn't bow to your wishes. You've spread gossip and lies. And when one family refused to let you dictate their lives, you tried to destroy them. How dare you? I dare because someone needs to say it. Martha stood facing Agnes across the room. You're not a good person, Mrs. Blackwell. You're just a rich one, and you've convinced yourself that means the same thing. But it doesn't. Real goodness is helping people who can't help you back. Real goodness is standing up for what's right, even when it costs you something. Real goodness is what these children have shown, holding together as a family despite losing their mother, despite having nothing, despite everything you threw at them. She took a breath. You wanted to prove Garrett couldn't manage without your help, but all you've proven is that some people will fight for their family no matter what. And that's something no amount of money can buy. Agnes stared at her with pure hatred. You sanctimonious little nobody. You come to this town with nothing, and you presume to lecture me, to judge me? You're a widow who couldn't even keep her own husband alive. Yeah, that's enough. Garrett's roar silenced the room. You can say whatever you want about me. You can call me a failure, call me inadequate, call me whatever makes you feel powerful, but you do not speak about Martha that way. You do not get to use her grief as a weapon. He walked toward Agnes, his face carved from stone. She's worth 10 of you, 20 of you. She's kept my children fed when you tried to starve them. She saved horses from burning barns while you paid someone to set those fires. She stayed up for 2 days straight to nurse my daughter through pneumonia. Pneumonia Nora got because we couldn't afford proper food or medicine, thanks to you. His voice dropped to something quiet and deadly. Martha Vale is the best thing that's happened to my family since my wife died. She's the mother my children needed when I was too broken to see what they needed. And if you ever speak ill of her again, you and I are going to have a problem that won't be solved in any meeting hall. The room was utterly silent. Even Agnes seemed shocked into speechlessness. Then the mayor cleared his throat. I think we've heard enough. Sheriff, given the evidence and testimony, I'm ordering a formal investigation into these allegations. Agnes, I'm sorry, but until this is resolved, I'm asking you to step down from your position on the town council. You can't. I can, and I am. This town can't function if people believe their leaders are corrupt. He looked genuinely pained. If you're innocent, the investigation will prove it. But until then, we need to maintain the community's trust. Agnes gathered her skirts and swept from the room, her supporters trailing behind her. But Martha noticed how many people stayed seated, how many looked at the Shaw family with new eyes, how the balance of power had shifted just slightly in their favor. After the meeting, people approached Garrett and Martha, some to offer apologies, some to pledge support, some just to shake their hands. Ben Henderson promised to help rebuild the barn, and several other ranchers said they'd contribute materials and labor. The storekeeper sheepishly said their deliveries would resume immediately. It wasn't a complete victory. Agnes still had her wealth and influence. The investigation might not find enough to charge her criminally, but the town had seen her for what she was, and that mattered. That night, after the children were in bed, Martha sat on the porch watching the stars. She was exhausted down to her bones, but it was the good kind of tired, the kind that came from fighting and winning, not just surviving. Garrett came out and sat beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Thank you, he said finally, for everything you said in there, for defending me and the children. I meant every word. I know. He turned to look at her. Martha, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Her heart started beating faster. All right. Do you ever regret coming here? Taking this job? Getting tangled up in all of this mess? Martha thought about it, really thought about it, about the hunger and the fear and the endless work, about Agnes Blackwell's harassment and the burning barn and Nora's fever, about all the pain and struggle these past months had brought. No, she said, I don't regret it. Why not? Because before I came here, I was just surviving, going from one job to the next, trying not to think about what I'd lost. But here, she searched for the right words. Here, I'm living again. It's hard and it hurts sometimes, but it matters. These children matter. This family matters. Garrett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Would you take a walk with me? There's something I want to show you. They walked through the moonlit ranch, past the burned barn and the corrals, up the hill to the small cemetery plot. Martha had seen it from a distance, but had never gone close. She understood that this was Garrett's private space where he went to talk to the wife he'd lost. 2 graves sat beneath an old oak tree. One was clearly Caroline's. The marker read, Beloved Wife and Mother. The other was smaller, newer. Baby Shaw, it said, with the same date. Garrett stood between the graves, his head bowed. I used to come up here every night, he said quietly. I'd tell Caroline about my day, about the children, about how I was failing at everything she'd made look easy. And I'd ask her what to do, how to keep going. What did she tell you? He smiled slightly. Nothing, because she's dead and dead people don't give advice. But standing here, talking to the empty air, somehow it helped. Made me feel less alone. He turned to face Martha. I haven't been up here in 2 weeks. Not since the day I defended you in church. I realized I didn't need to come here anymore to figure out what to do. Because I wasn't alone. I had you. Martha's breath caught. I loved Caroline, Garrett continued. I loved her from the day I met her until the day she died, and I'll carry that love the rest of my life. She gave me 7 beautiful children and 10 years of happiness. I'll never forget that. He took a step closer to Martha. But she's gone, and I'm still here. And so are you. And these past months, watching you care for my children like they're your own, watching you fight for this family, watching you be so damn brave and stubborn and impossible. His voice cracked. I've fallen in love with you, Martha Vale, and I don't know what to do about it. Martha's eyes filled with tears. I love my husband too. Thomas was good and kind and everything I ever wanted. Losing him nearly destroyed me. I know. But you're right, he's gone, and I'm still here. She reached out and took Garrett's hand, and somewhere along the way, while I was busy trying to just survive, I fell in love with you too. With you and your impossible children, and this broken ranch and everything that comes with it. Garrett pulled her into his arms, and Martha let herself be held. Let herself feel something other than grief for the first time in almost a year. Let herself hope that maybe, just maybe, there could be happiness after loss. I want you to stay, he said into her hair, not as the cook, not as the hired help, but as my wife, as their mother, as part of this family for real. Martha pulled back to look at him. Are you asking me to marry you, Garrett Shaw? I'm asking if you'd even consider it. I know it's soon. I know we've got nothing to offer but hard work and trouble. I know. She kissed him. It was awkward and unpracticed, neither of them having kissed anyone but their dead spouses in years. But it was honest and real and full of something that felt like hope. Yes, she said when they broke apart. I'll marry you. Really? Really? Though we're going to have some very specific conversations about finances and child rearing and who's in charge of the kitchen. He laughed, actually laughed, the sound echoing across the dark ranch. You're in charge of the kitchen. I learned that the day you dropped a skillet on my foot. Smart man. They walked back to the house hand in hand. The future was still uncertain. The barn still needed rebuilding. Winter was still coming. Agnes Blackwell's investigation would take months, and she'd fight them every step of the way. But they'd face it together, and that made all the difference. The next morning, Garrett gathered the children in the parlor. They sat in their usual spots, looking curious and slightly worried. Big family meetings usually meant bad news. I have something to tell you all, Garrett said. Something important. Daniel crossed his arms. If this is about selling the ranch, it's not about selling the ranch. It's about Martha. Garrett looked at each of them. I've asked her to marry me, to be my wife, and to be your mother, not to replace the mother you lost. Nobody could do that, but to be the mother you need now. Silence. The children looked at Martha, then at each other, then back at their father. Finally, Rebecca spoke. Do you love her, Papa? Yes, I do. Does she love you? Garrett looked at Martha. Do you? Yes, Martha said. I love your father, and I love all of you. I know I haven't been here very long, and I know I'll never be your real mother. But I want to be part of this family. If you'll have me. More silence. Then Thomas spoke up. Will you keep making those biscuits? Despite the tension, Martha had to smile. Every Sunday. Then I'm in favor. Elizabeth hugged her rag doll tighter. Will you still tell us stories and teach us things? Of course. Okay then. The twins conferred in whispers. Then Sarah announced, We like you. You can marry Papa. That left Daniel and Rebecca and little Nora, the oldest and the youngest, the bookends of the family. Daniel stood and walked over to Martha. For a long moment, he just looked at her. Then he held out his hand. Welcome to the family, he said. Ma'am. Martha shook his hand, blinking back tears. Thank you, Daniel. Rebecca was crying openly now, but she was smiling too. Mama would have liked you. I know she would. I wish I could have known her. You do, in a way. You see her every time you look at us. Rebecca wiped her eyes. Thank you for not giving up on us. Thank you for staying. I'll always stay. That's a promise. Finally, there was only Nora. The 3-year-old had been watching everything with those solemn blue eyes. Now she climbed down from Rebecca's lap and walked over to Martha. She stood there for a moment, considering, her thumb in her mouth. Then she took her thumb out and said, in her tiny, clear voice, "Mama." Martha's heart cracked open. She knelt down and gathered the little girl into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm here. Don't go away. Never. I'm never going away." Nora buried her face in Martha's shoulder, and Martha held her close, feeling the weight of the promise she'd just made. These children had been abandoned by death once already. They needed to know that the people they loved would stay, and Martha would stay. Through every hardship, every struggle, every impossible day. She would stay because that's what family meant. Not blood or biology, but choice. The choice to show up, day after day, and fight for the people you loved. The investigation into Agnes Blackwell took 3 months. In the end, they couldn't prove criminal conspiracy. Her lawyers were too good. Her connections too deep. But the court of public opinion had already rendered its verdict. People knew what she'd done, even if they couldn't prove it in a court of law. Her influence in Ridgefall withered. The mercantile owners, freed from her pressure, resumed normal business with the Shaw Ranch. Other families who'd been quietly intimidated by her found their courage and spoke up. She remained wealthy and prominent, but she was no longer feared. Sometimes the victory wasn't in the punishment. Sometimes it was just in surviving and proving the bullies wrong. The barn was rebuilt by spring, with help from neighbors who'd stayed silent during the worst of it, but found their conscience eventually. It wasn't as grand as the old one, but it was solid and weatherproof, and most importantly, it was theirs. Martha and Garrett married in April, exactly a year after Thomas had died. It was a small ceremony, just the family and a few close friends. Martha wore a simple dress that Rebecca had helped her sew. The children stood with them, part of the ceremony, because they were all making vows that day. When the minister asked who gave this woman to be married, all 7 children said together, "We do." There was no honeymoon, no fancy reception. They went home to the ranch and had dinner together as a family. A real dinner, with enough food for everyone and seconds if they wanted. Martha had made her special biscuits, and there was butter and jam to go with them, and coffee that wasn't weak or bitter. After dinner, while Garrett put the little ones to bed, Martha sat with Rebecca and Daniel on the porch. "Are you happy?" Rebecca asked. Martha thought about it. Happiness seemed too small a word for what she felt. She'd lost so much. Her husband, her farm, the life she'd planned. But she'd gained something too. A second chance. A family that needed her as much as she needed them. A home that was built not on perfection, but on stubborn refusal to give up. "Yes," she said. "I'm happy." "Good." Rebecca leaned her head on Martha's shoulder. "We are too." Daniel stood up, stretching. "I'm heading to bed. Long day tomorrow with the planting." He paused. "Ma?" It was the first time he'd called her that. Martha's throat tightened. "Yes?" "Thanks for dropping that skillet on Pa's foot. Best thing that ever happened to this family." He went inside, leaving Martha shaking with silent laughter. "He's not wrong," Rebecca said. "Everything got better after you came. Not easy, but better." "Life's not supposed to be easy, honey. It's just supposed to be worth living." "Is it? Worth living?" Martha looked out at the ranch, the rebuilt barn, the planted fields, the corrals where the horses grazed peacefully. She thought about the children sleeping upstairs, full and safe. She thought about the man who was now her husband, who'd chosen her not despite her scars, but because of them, who understood that broken people could still build something strong together. "Yes," she said, "it's worth living." Years later, when people asked Martha about those first months at Ridgefall Ranch, she'd tell them the truth. It had been hell. She'd been hungry and scared and so tired she could barely stand. There were days she'd wanted to quit, wanted to run, wanted to be anywhere but that broken ranch with those grieving children. But she'd stayed, and staying had made all the difference. Not because it was easy, not because everything worked out perfectly, but because sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up. Refuse to let the bastards win. Refuse to let grief or fear or impossible odds dictate your life. The children grew up strong and stubborn, with their mother Caroline's kindness and their father's determination and Martha's refusal to quit. They learned that family wasn't just blood, that home wasn't just a place, and that love was something you chose every single day. Rebecca became a teacher, passing on the lessons Martha had taught her. Daniel took over the ranch eventually, building it into something that would have made both his mothers proud. The younger children scattered to their own lives and dreams, but they came home often, bringing spouses and children of their own. And Martha and Garrett grew old together, their love built not on passion or perfection, but on the solid foundation of two broken people who'd chosen to be whole together. They fought sometimes, both too stubborn to back down easily. They struggled sometimes. Life on a ranch was never easy. But they stayed together, year after year, building something that lasted. On quiet evenings, Martha would sit on the porch and think about the woman she'd been when she first arrived at Ridgefall Ranch. Bitter and grieving, convinced her life was over. She barely recognized that woman now. She'd learned something important in these years, that endings weren't always the end, that sometimes losing everything was just the universe clearing space for something new, that the worst moment of your life could be the doorway to the best thing that ever happened to you, if you were brave enough to walk through it. Little Nora, who wasn't so little anymore, asked her once if she missed her old life. The farm in Kansas, the husband she'd lost, the future that had been taken from her. Sometimes, Martha answered honestly, but missing something doesn't mean you'd go back if you could. Your first papa was a good man, and I loved the life we had, but I wouldn't trade what I have now for anything in the world. Even though it was hard? Especially because it was hard. Easy things don't teach you what you're made of. Hard things do. That was the lesson, in the end. Not that suffering makes you stronger. That was nonsense, and suffering just for its own sake was pointless. But that how you respond to suffering defines who you are. You can let it break you, or you can let it forge you into something stronger than you were before. Martha chose to be forged. She chose to fight for a family that wasn't hers by blood, but was hers in every way that mattered. She chose to love again, even when loving meant risking more loss. She chose to build a home in the ruins of her old life. And in choosing those things, she found something she'd thought was lost forever. Not happiness, exactly. Happiness was too simple a word. But purpose. Belonging. The bone-deep knowledge that she mattered, that her life meant something, that the world was better because she'd refused to give up. On her last day, many, many years after she'd first arrived at Ridgefall Ranch, Martha sat surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. The ranch had prospered over the decades, growing into something Caroline and Garrett had only dreamed of. And Martha had been there for all of it, the stubborn heart that had held the family together through every crisis. Garrett sat beside her, his hand in hers, both of them old and tired and ready for whatever came next. "No regrets?" he asked quietly, too low for the others to hear. Martha thought about the iron skillet she'd dropped on his boot all those years ago, about 7 scared, grieving children who'd become her own, about a ranch that had been broken and a family that had been shattered and a woman who'd been convinced her story was over. "No regrets," she said. "Not a single one." She meant it, every word. Because, in the end, the measure of a life wasn't in how much you had or how easy things were. It was in how much you loved, how hard you fought, and how many times you got back up when life knocked you down. Martha Vale had loved fiercely. She'd fought like hell, and she'd never, ever quit. That was enough. That was everything. And as she closed her eyes for the last time, surrounded by the family she'd chosen, and the family who'd chosen her back, Martha knew that the best thing she'd ever done was drop an iron skillet on a stubborn rancher's boot and demand respect. Everything else had followed from that one moment of refusing to accept less than she deserved. Sometimes that's all it takes. One moment of courage, one refusal to give up, one choice to fight for something better. And sometimes, if you're lucky and stubborn enough, that one moment changes everything.